I was standing in the middle of a brightly lit convenience store, and the only sound was the low, vibrating hum of soda refrigerators. On the counter, right by the register, stood a plastic cup. Steam was still rising from it. A thin thread of white vapor curled upward and dissolved beneath the fluorescent lights. Next to it lay a smartphone. The screen was still on, refusing to go to sleep. I didn't want to read it. Honestly, I didn't. But my eyes caught on the Open Messenger app anyway. The last message had been sent 3 minutes ago. It read, "He's come back to the window. He's just standing there and smiling. He doesn't have eyelids." I slowly lifted my head and looked at the panoramic glass separating me from the night outside. There was no one there. Only my own reflection. And then I noticed that the reflection in the glass wasn't copying my movements. Since then, I always carry 2 spare fuel canisters. And I never stop on empty highways anymore. This happened 3 years ago, on the night of December 31st going into January 1st. Most people were sitting at festive tables, popping champagne and watching the same old TV programs. I was behind the wheel of my old Ford, somewhere near the border of Karelia and the Leningrad region. A messy divorce, fights over property, I just wanted to run. I decided to spend New Year's Eve on the road, in absolute silence, far away from the hypocrisy of family celebrations. The navigation screen showed a solid gray line. Forest everywhere. Trees burdened with heavy caps of snow loomed over the road, forming an endless white tunnel. The dashboard thermometer read -27. The heater roared at full blast, but the cabin was still bitterly cold. I drove in my jacket, gloved hands slipping on the icy steering wheel. The fuel gauge had been crawling steadily toward the red zone for half an hour. I knew there should be a gas station ahead, old, corporate, one of those stations stranded far from civilization. When a glow appeared ahead, I exhaled in relief. The light was unnaturally bright. Against the inky darkness of the forest, the station looked like a spaceship that had landed in a clearing. Perfectly cleared asphalt. Snowbanks piled neatly along the edges by a grader. A massive canopy over the pumps shone so intensely that my eyes hurt after hours of darkness. I turned off the highway. The tires crunched over packed snow. The first thing I noticed was the emptiness. Not a single car. Not a single truck in the long-haul parking area. Only the wind chased loose snow across the spotless asphalt. I killed the engine. Silence crashed down instantly. Normally, gas stations hum with road noise, voices, music from parked cars. Here, nothing. Just the ticking of the cooling engine. I got out. The frost slapped me in the face, stealing my breath. I inserted the nozzle into the tank. Normally you have to go inside, give the pump number, pay first. But the moment I squeezed the handle, the pump hummed to life. Numbers started running. Liters. Rubles. Fuel was flowing. I froze. A system glitch? Or had someone paid and driven off without refueling? "Nothing's ever free," flashed through my mind. I glanced at the building. Glass doors. Lights on inside. Shelves of chips, racks of motor oil visible. But no one at the register. I decided to be honest. I didn't want to start the year by stealing gas, even by accident. Besides, I needed coffee, the strongest they had. I walked toward the entrance. Snow squeaked under my boots so loudly it felt like the sound could be heard miles away in the forest. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss. Warm air smelled of vanilla, baked goods, and cheap car freshener. "Hello?" I called. "Anyone here?" My voice sounded dull and was swallowed immediately by the hum of the refrigerators. No answer. I went deeper into the store. Everything looked perfectly normal. Shelves neat. The floor gleamed as if it had just been washed. And yet the feeling that something was wrong kept growing, itching at the back of my skull. I approached the register area. That's where the coffee cup stood. I touched it. Hot. Not warm. Not cooling. Hot. That meant the person who'd poured it had been here no more than 5 minutes ago. "Excuse me." I shouted louder. "My pump turned on by itself, I want to pay." Silence. I stepped behind the counter, hoping to see a cashier who'd dropped something, or maybe fallen asleep in the back. No one was there. The chair was pushed back, as if someone had jumped up abruptly. An open pack of cigarettes lay on the floor. And a phone. The smartphone lay face up. Black casing on the white plastic countertop. It wasn't locked. I know you're not supposed to touch other people's phones. But the situation was too strange. I leaned closer. WhatsApp was open. A chat with the contact named Mom. I skimmed the last messages. 23:15, "Mom, it's so boring here." No one at all. The highway's empty. 23:20, voice message. 23:40, some guy is walking along the edge of the forest. Weird. No jacket. 23:42, "Mom, he's just standing there and staring. It's been 5 minutes. I'm scared." 23:45, he came closer to the light. He's very tall. Unnaturally tall. 23:48, I locked the doors, but the lock feels flimsy. 23:50, he came back to the window. He's just standing there and smiling. He doesn't have eyelids. He pressed his face to the glass. The last message was sent at 23:52. I checked my watch. 23:56. 4 minutes ago. A chill ran down my spine despite the warmth inside. I locked the doors. But the doors had opened for me on their own. I spun toward the entrance. The glass doors were closed. Beyond them, only the lit forecourt and my car standing alone at the pump. And past that, a wall of darkness. I looked back at the phone. At the bottom, in the text field, a blinking cursor hovered over a message that had been typed but not sent. He came in. He didn't open the door. He just walked through. I jerked my hand away from the phone as if it were red hot. At that moment, I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. To the right of the register hung a security monitor, split into 9 squares. The sales floor. Storage rooms. Entrance. Pumps. Backyard. I stared at the screen. Camera 4 showed the backyard of the station, the area where they took out the trash. Large dumpsters stood there. The lighting was dim, but footprints were clearly visible in the snow. Bare footprints. They led from the forest to the back door of the building. And the door on the monitor stood wide open. I slowly turned my gaze to the utility room door directly behind me, barely 2 meters from the register. It was ajar. Icy air poured from it. The same draft I'd felt on my legs but hadn't paid attention to. No sound came from the darkness beyond. No rustle. No breathing. But I felt it. I felt a gaze. Heavy. Sticky. Studying me from the dark. My brain screamed, "Run!" But my body locked up. A primitive response, freeze, and the predator won't notice you. Then the phone on the counter chimed softly. A new message. I glanced sideways. The contact, Mom, was typing. "Lena, why aren't you answering?" "Lena?" The sound shattered the paralysis. I stepped back, never taking my eyes off the cracked utility room door. Then another step. The lights in the store flickered. Once. Twice. For a split second everything went dark, and in that darkness I heard a sound. A wet slap. like a slab of raw meat hitting tile. It came from behind the utility room door. The lights came back on. The gap in the door was wider now. I could see the edge of a shelving unit inside. And on the floor. On the floor lay a hand. A woman's hand in a blue uniform sleeve. It lay motionless. The fingers were curled, as if grasping at air. And beside the hand stood a leg. Pale. Gray. An unnaturally elongated foot with long, filthy nails. It didn't look human. Too many joints. I didn't scream. My voice simply vanished. I turned and ran. I sprinted for the exit, expecting the doors to jam, to trap me. The motion sensor lagged. I slammed my shoulder into the glass, the doors slid apart, and I spilled out into the frost. The cold air burned my lungs, but it snapped me back to life. The car. I ran to the Ford. The nozzle was still stuck in the tank. Gasoline had long since overflowed, spreading across the asphalt in a massive shimmering puddle under the floodlights. The smell of fuel was overpowering. I yanked the nozzle out, not bothering to hang it up, and dropped the hose onto the ground. Gas splashed onto my jacket and pants. I jumped into the driver's seat. Key. Turn. The starter ground. "Come on, girl, come on," I whispered. The car, left in the cold for barely 10 minutes, acted as if it were frozen solid. The engine coughed and died. I looked at the store window. There, behind the glass, by the register where I'd stood seconds ago, someone was there now. It stood in the shadows, but I could see the silhouette. It was taller than the shelves. Its head nearly brushed the ceiling lights. It was thin, like a skeleton wrapped in parchment. And it was looking at me. I couldn't see its face, only two dim patches where eyes should be. The creature slowly raised a hand and pressed its palm to the glass. The fingers were long, with extra joints. I turned the key again. The engine roared to life. I floored the gas. The wheels spun, shrieking on ice and gasoline. The car fishtailed, then the studs bit into asphalt. I tore away, not even looking at the road, just away from that light. I burst onto the highway, nearly sliding into the ditch. 120, 140. The car shook on the snowy road, but I didn't lift my foot. I stared into the rearview mirror. The bright island of the gas station was shrinking. And then, the lights went out. All at once. The massive glowing island in the middle of the forest vanished, as if someone had thrown a switch. And in the darkness that followed, I saw two red lights ignite on the road directly behind my car. They were high. At the level of my roof. And they were closing in. I drove like that for another 50 kilometers, until I saw the lights of a settlement. Only when I saw houses, chimney smoke, and garlands in the windows did I slow down. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. My teeth chattered. I stopped at a 24-hour shop in the village. There were people there, drunk, laughing, setting off fireworks. I have never been so happy to see drunk people in my life. I sat in the car until morning. I couldn't make myself get out. I kept watching the mirrors. When dawn came, I stepped out to inspect the car. On the trunk lid, in a layer of road grime and frost, was a print. A massive hand. 7 fingers. And long claw marks gouged through the paint down to bare metal. I didn't report it to the police. What would I have said? That a monster scared me at a gas station? I checked the news a few days later. There were reports of a missing cashier from the night shift. The official version was robbery. The criminal had supposedly abducted the girl and fled. According to the papers, the security cameras had been damaged by a power surge. No footage survived. But I know it wasn't a robbery. I still remember the smell in that store. Not coffee, Not vanilla. Beneath it was another scent. The smell of damp earth and old, stagnant blood. Now, whenever I have to drive far, I plan my route so I won't need gas at night. And if my tank runs low, I'd rather pull over and wait for dawn, doors locked. Because sometimes, when I look out the window at night, I think I see those two dim lights in the dark. And I know it's still searching. Searching for those who are alone on the road. For those who think bright light means safety. Happy New Year. And keep an eye on your fuel gauge. I was standing by the driver's door, my breath fogging the air as it mixed with the thick, foul cloud of exhaust. The engine ran smoothly, steadily, like a massive mechanical heart that didn't care about the cold. The window was half lowered. I leaned inside, expecting to see a drunk driver slumped over the wheel, but the cabin was empty. Almost empty. On the rubber floor mat, right beneath the brake pedal, a dark puddle gleamed in the glow of the dashboard lights. It didn't smell like gasoline. It didn't smell like oil. Instead, a heavy, sickly sweet metallic stench hit my nose. A coppery taste instantly coated my tongue. And in that same second, through the steady hum of the engine, I heard it, behind me, about 5 meters away, the unmistakable crunch of snow. Someone was standing in the shadow of the building, watching me examine his work. I still can't sleep without pills. And every time I see a car with its engine running in an empty parking lot, my hands start to shake. What I'm about to tell you happened 3 years ago, but the cold of that night is still lodged deep in my bones. I worked at a roadside auto service station along the M4 highway, about 80 kilometers from the nearest major city. It wasn't the kind of place where you stopped for a latte and a branded hot dog. It was an old, grease-soaked hangar with 2 service bays, a tiny parts shop, and a single gas pump that worked every other time you tried to use it. The owner, Artur, cut corners on everything, including security, so during night shifts we worked alone. They paid double for it, and as a part-time student, I desperately needed the money, especially before the holidays. It was New Year's Eve. December 31st, 11 o'clock at night. The highway was dead. In the last 3 hours maybe 2 trucks had passed, their lights quickly swallowed by the snowstorm. The temperature had dropped to -25. The old window frames in my little booth were frozen solid, and even the oil heater, cranked to its limit, couldn't keep up. I sat there in my jacket, scrolling on my phone and drinking terrible instant coffee just to warm my hands on the mug. At 11:15 p.m., I heard a sound. It wasn't the roar of a truck flying past. It was a soft, shushing sound, tires rolling slowly over packed snow. I looked up and glanced out the window. A gray sedan rolled into the lot in front of the bays, straight into the yellow pool of light cast by the lone street lamp. An old Toyota, probably early 90s. It stopped about 10 meters from the entrance. The engine wasn't turned off. I waited. Usually, the driver jumps out right away, knocks on the door, asks for windshield fluid or directions to the nearest restroom. But the Toyota's door didn't open. 5 minutes passed. The car just stood there. Thick white exhaust poured from the tailpipe, the wind immediately pressing it down to the ground and wrapping the rear of the car in a dense fog. The headlights were off, only the parking lights were on. "What are you waiting for?" I muttered aloud. My own voice sounded unnaturally loud in the empty room. Maybe it had broken down. Or overheated, despite the cold. I set the mug aside and grabbed a powerful flashlight from the desk but didn't turn it on. I decided to wait a little longer. On New Year's Eve, there are only 2 kinds of people on the highway, those who are in serious trouble, and those who are the trouble. Another 10 minutes passed. The engine continued its monotonous hum. The sound was starting to get on my nerves, low, even, cutting through the howl of the wind. I stood up. I had to check. If someone was in trouble out there and I just sat here warming my hands, I'd never forgive myself. I pulled my hat down tighter, grabbed the ring of keys to the service bay, clenching them in my fist like a makeshift knuckle duster, and pushed open the heavy front door. The cold hit my face like a slap. The wind howled, swaying the overhead wires. I shivered and stepped off the porch. The snow crunched under my boots so loudly it felt like the sound could carry for kilometers. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to be heard over the wind. "You okay? The service is closed, but if you need help." No response. I moved closer. Now I was 5 meters from the car. The windows were heavily tinted, the rear ones coated in frosty patterns. I couldn't see if anyone was inside. But I could hear the engine, running smoothly, without a hitch. So they had fuel. I walked around to the driver's side. The tint revealed nothing. I raised my hand to knock on the glass, then hesitated. Something was wrong. My intuition, that primal sense that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, was screaming at me, "Don't touch it." But I did. I knocked on the window with my knuckles. Nothing. Just the hum of the engine and the whistle of the wind. I pulled on the door handle. It gave. The door wasn't locked. I slowly pulled it open. Warm air spilled out, colliding with the icy wind. "Hey, man, you alive?" I asked, leaning in. The driver's seat was empty. I froze, gripping the cold metal of the door. My eyes darted around the interior, trying to piece it together. The heater was blasting at full power, it was sauna hot inside. On the passenger seat lay a crumpled fast food bag, greasy and soaked through. The center console was littered with cigarette butts. The ashtray overflowed, filters were everywhere, in the cup holders, on the floor, even on the seat. Someone had been chain-smoking for hours. The radio was on low. Through the static, a news anchor's voice cut through. "The search continues. Police are asking anyone who has seen a gray sedan." The words caught in my throat. I lowered my gaze to the driver's floor mat. There was the puddle. A dark, viscous liquid that hadn't frozen thanks to the heat from the heater. It was slowly seeping off the rubber mat into the carpet. I leaned closer, and then the smell hit me. Not spilled soda. Not coffee. The smell of raw meat and rusty iron. Blood. A lot of blood. That's when one realization made my legs go weak. There was a lot of blood, but none on the seat. Which meant someone had been sitting here, injured, and then got out. Or someone had been dragged out. But there were no tracks around the car. I straightened abruptly and looked at the snow by the driver's door. Fresh, untouched snow. The wind covered tracks quickly, but not that quickly. If someone had stepped out 5 minutes ago, I would have seen at least depressions. So the driver had left much earlier. Before the last heavy snowfall. But the car had arrived only 20 minutes ago. So who drove it? I backed away, leaving the door open. The cabin light dimly illuminated the snow. And that's when I noticed it. On the back seat, in the shadows, something was lying there. Something large, covered with an old blanket. The blanket rose and fell ever so slightly. Breathing? Or just the vibration of the engine? I reached for my pocket to grab my phone and turn on the flashlight, but my fingers found nothing. I'd left it in the booth, on the table, next to my cooling coffee. "Shit," I whispered. The radio suddenly grew louder, as if breaking through the interference. "The suspect is armed and extremely dangerous. Distinguishing feature, an injury to the right hand." I looked at the steering wheel again. On the leather wrap, on the right side, was a clear, smeared handprint. A bloody handprint. And then the Toyota's engine sputtered and died. Silence fell. Absolute, ringing silence of a winter night, broken only by the wind. The cabin light went out. I was left standing in the dark, next to an open car that might contain a corpse, or someone still alive. I took a step back, ready to run for the service building. I needed my phone. I needed to call the police, lock myself inside. Crunch. The sound didn't come from the car. It came from my left, from the dark corner of the service bay. I snapped my head around. There, in the thick shadow beyond the reach of the light, stood a silhouette. Tall. Broad. Completely motionless, blending into the wall. If it hadn't moved, I would have taken it for a stack of old tires. But I saw the vapor puffing from its mouth. Rhythmic clouds of breath. He had been standing there the whole time. While I walked to the car. While I looked inside. Waiting until I was close enough that he could cut off my escape. My brain worked faster than my body. 15 meters to the service door. 7 meters to him. He was closer to the door than I was. If I ran for the entrance, he'd intercept me. The silhouette stepped forward. The light fell on his hand. His right hand was wrapped in some kind of cloth, soaked black. In his left, he held something long and heavy. A crowbar? A wrench? "Hey, kid," he said. His voice was hoarse, smoke-rough, like sandpaper scraping metal. "You got a light?" The question was absurd. Mocking. I didn't answer. I hurled the key ring I was still clutching straight at his face. It was stupid, but it bought me a second. He instinctively jerked his head and raised his good hand. The keys clanged against the metal bar. I ran. Not toward the service door, I wouldn't have made it. I sprinted the other way, past the car, toward the gas pump, and from there into the darkness, toward the forest that began right beyond the highway. "Stop, you bastard," he roared. I heard heavy footsteps behind me. The snow was deep, my legs sank, my lungs burned from the icy air. I knew this place. I knew there was an old fence behind the station, with a hole we used to sneak scrap metal through. I rounded the pump, nearly slipping on ice. Behind me came a dull thud. He slammed shoulder first into the metal pump, missing the turn. "I see you," he yelled. I dove between the trash containers. There it was, the hole in the chain-link fence. I squeezed through, tearing my jacket on rusted wire, and tumbled down into a ditch. It was dark at the bottom. I fell into a snowdrift, buried myself headfirst, and froze. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it was vibrating through the ground. Above me, by the fence, footsteps crunched. He stopped right over my head. "Come out," he said quietly. No more shouting. His voice was calm, businesslike. "You'll freeze down there. My car's warm." I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep my breath from fogging. Tears from cold and fear streamed down my cheeks, freezing in the wind. He stood there for a minute. Maybe two. He shone a flashlight down into the ditch. The beam passed centimeters from my face. I shut my eyes, praying to every god I knew. Then the light vanished. "All right," he said. "Happy New Year." His footsteps crunched away. I lay in the snow for another half hour, afraid to move. I heard the Toyota's engine start again. Heard a door slam. The car turned around and sped onto the highway, tires squealing. Only when the sound finally faded did I dare crawl out. I was shaking so badly I couldn't stand. On all fours, I made my way back into the service station. The door was still open. Inside, it was freezing. With trembling fingers, I grabbed my phone. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until the new year. I dialed 112. The police arrived 40 minutes later. They examined the site. Tire tracks. My footprints. His footprints. They found blood in the snow where the car had stood. But the worst thing they found came later. When the investigator was inspecting the area, he called me over to the back wall of the bay, where I had run after throwing the keys. "You said he was standing by the corner," the investigator asked, shining his flashlight on the snow. "Yes. In the shadow. Look here." The snow beneath the window of my booth was trampled flat. A mess of footprints. And dozens of cigarette butts. The same ones I'd seen inside the car. "He didn't just arrive," the investigator said, looking up at my window. "He stood here for a long time. Watching you sit inside. Drinking coffee. Scrolling on your phone. He waited for you to come out." The car was found the next morning, abandoned in a ditch 50 kilometers from the station. In the trunk was the body of the owner, a man who had gone missing 3 days earlier. The one who stood beneath my window was never found. I don't work night shifts anymore. And I never, do you hear me, never, approach cars with their engines running. Because sometimes an empty driver's seat isn't an invitation to help. It's a trap. And the hunter is already standing right behind you. I was standing less than a foot from his face, close enough to hear the tiny bubbles of saliva popping at the corners of his mouth. It was the only sound in the entire room, apart from the low hum of the refrigerators. His eyes were stretched so wide it looked as if his eyelids had been taped to his eyebrows. The irises, a dark brown, didn't move at all, but his pupils trembled, shrinking and dilating in sync with the flicker of the lamp above our heads. From his left nostril, a thick substance slowly oozed out, a sticky mixture of mucus and blood serum. The drop swelled, grew heavy, then fell with a wet splat into a puddle of cold coffee on the counter. Splat. A pause. Splat. I reached out to shake his shoulder, then stopped. His uniform didn't smell like detergent, but like something sharp and chemical. As if someone had been chewing mint gum and then vomited bile. I lowered my gaze. His boots were standing in a pool of vomit. It was fresh, still warm, faint steam rising from it. But he hadn't stepped away. Not even an inch. He was standing right in it. And he was staring straight through me. This isn't an urban legend or some creepypasta from the internet. This happened to me 3 years ago, on the night between December 31st and January 1st, on the M4 highway. I no longer stop at gas stations where only one lamp is lit. And I never get out of my car if I don't see movement behind the cashier's window. The fuel gauge had been sitting on empty for the last 20 kilometers. The yellow warning light on the dashboard wasn't just glowing, it felt like it was burning straight into my eyes. It was 11:40 p.m. The whole country was already sitting at their tables, chopping salads and popping champagne, while I, like an idiot, was driving down an empty, frozen highway toward Voronezh, hoping to make it to my parents' place before the clock struck midnight. Outside it was -25. The heater in my old Ford was working at full blast, but the windows were still creeping over with icy patterns. The radio hissed with static, signal always dropped in this lowland. I knew that if my car died out here, I'd turn into an ice statue by morning. There were no cars. None at all. Just endless black forest on both sides and dirty snow along the shoulder, lit by my high beams. When a grimy yellow blotch of light appeared ahead, I exhaled so loudly it startled me. A gas station. Not a clean, branded one with hot dogs and smiling attendants, but some nameless relic from the 90s. The price board was dark. Only a crooked neon sign reading, 24 hours, was lit, and the first letter flickered nervously, emitting a dry electrical crackle I could hear even through the closed windows. I turned in. The crusted snow crunched under my tires. The lot was empty. No trucks, no cars. Just a lonely snowdrift that had once been a snowman, and an old Lada Niva parked in the shadows behind the building, probably the employee's car. I killed the engine. Silence fell instantly. Heavy, padded winter silence. I got out, and the cold slapped me in the face, gluing my nostrils shut with every breath. I stuck the nozzle into the tank and squeezed the handle. Nothing. The pump hummed, but no fuel flowed. Damn it, I muttered, staring at the display. Payment at the register. Of course. No self-service in the middle of nowhere. I pulled my hat down tighter, shoved my hands into my pockets, and walked toward the building. The snow squeaked under my boots, unnaturally loud. The windows were plastered with old motor oil ads and paper snowflakes cut from office paper. The lights were on inside, but I saw no movement. I pulled the door toward me. Locked. Then I pushed. It gave way. The doorbell rang, a sharp, cheap sound that echoed through the empty shop. Good evening. I called, brushing snow off my boots. Pump 5, 92, fill it up. No answer. It was hot inside. Too hot. The radiators were clearly blasting at full power. The air was stale, smelling of burnt coffee, cheap plastic, and something else, sweet and unpleasant, like a dead mouse rotting under a shelf. I walked past rows of chips and windshield fluid. The floor was dirty, black streaks of melted snow led from the entrance but stopped halfway across the room. Beyond that, the tiles were dry and clean. Hey! Anyone alive in here? Happy New Year! I stepped up to the counter, and froze. Behind it stood a guy. Young, maybe 25. He wore a blue vest with a name badge that read Artem. He was turned halfway toward me, staring at the monitor of the register. His hands rested on the keyboard, fingers hovering over the keys, as if he were about to ring something up and changed his mind at the last second. Artem? I said, stepping closer. Your pump isn't turning on. He didn't turn around. Didn't even blink. I came closer, irritation building inside me, mixed with a vague, crawling unease. Maybe he had earbuds in. I walked around the rack of chocolate bars so I could see his face. Hey, man, can you hear me? I just need gas and... The words stuck in my throat. Artem wasn't wearing earbuds. He wasn't really there at all. His face was pale as paper, slick with large beads of sweat that ran down his temples and disappeared under his collar. His mouth hung slightly open, his lower lip trembling in tiny, barely perceptible spasms. But the worst part was his eyes. They were filled with terror, not fear, but raw, animal terror, the kind that stops your heart cold. He was looking at the monitor, but I could tell he wasn't reading it. His gaze was unfocused. And then I smelled it. That same sour mint stench. I looked down and saw the puddle on the floor. Artem had vomited. Right at his own feet. Yellow-green sludge spread around his boots, soaking the cuffs of his pants. But he hadn't moved. He stood there in his own vomit, gripping the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles had turned white, like they might tear through the skin. Hey, my voice wavered. Are you okay? Should I call an ambulance? I reached for my phone. That's when I noticed something else on the counter, right in front of him. A puddle of spilled coffee. Cold, filmed over. And in its center, red threads were spreading. Blood. I looked up at his face. Blood was running from Artem's nose. Slowly. Thickly. It pooled above his upper lip, then broke free and fell. Drip. He didn't wipe it away. He didn't move. He wasn't even breathing deeply, his chest barely moved, making microscopic, convulsive motions, just enough to keep him conscious, not enough to be obvious. Artem, I whispered, a wave of icy cold running down my spine despite the heat. What's happening? I took a step toward him, meaning to shake him, to pull him out of this catatonic state. I reached across the counter. My fingers were inches from his shoulder. Then his eyes twitched. Not his head. Just his eyes. His pupils snapped sideways toward me, then jerked sharply downward. To the right and down. Toward the narrow passage behind the counter. Toward the door to the back room or the restroom. There was a plea in that movement. A desperate, screaming plea, "Don't touch me. Leave." I froze, arms still outstretched. My mind raced, trying to assemble an explanation. Stroke? Drugs? Shock? Why was he standing like this? I looked where his eyes had pointed. The cashier area was narrow. Cigarette shelves on one side, the counter on the other. Behind Artem was a door marked staff only. It was open just a couple of centimeters. Inside was darkness. But not complete darkness. In the crack, at the level of Artem's knees, I saw something glint. Not metal. A wet gleam. An eye. Someone was crouching there in the dark, watching us through the gap. My breath caught. I instinctively stepped back, my boots squeaking on the tile. At that exact moment, a sound came from the back room. A soft, wet click. Like someone smacking their tongue. Artem's whole body flinched, but he didn't move from his spot. A tear slid from his eye, mixed with sweat, and ran down his cheek. I saw the tendons in his neck stand out. He was fighting the urge to scream, fighting every survival instinct telling him to run. Something was keeping him there. I slowly lowered my gaze beneath the counter, to where Artem's legs were hidden by the panel. From my side, I couldn't see anything. But I understood. Someone, or something, was down there. Right behind his legs. I'll go, I croaked. My voice sounded, to my own ears. I forgot my wallet. I began backing away. Slowly. Without turning my back. Artem's eyes flicked to me again. There was no plea in them now. There was farewell. And there was a warning. Click. The sound didn't come from the back room. It came from the front door. The automatic lock. I heard the magnetic mechanism engage, sealing the exit shut. I spun around. The red indicator above the door switched to green, but the door didn't open. It had been locked remotely. The control panel was usually behind the counter. Within reach of the cashier. I looked back at Artem. His right hand, the one closer to the edge of the counter, wasn't resting on it. It was hanging down. "Open the door," I said, fighting to keep my voice from breaking. Artem didn't move. Tears were streaming now, washing blood from his lips. Something long slid out through the crack in the back room door. At first I thought it was a stick. Then I saw the joints. A finger. Inhumanly long, filthy, with a black, broken nail. The finger gently touched Artem's calf. The cashier made a sound, a thin, strangled squeak, like air leaking from a balloon. "Open the damn door." I screamed and slammed my shoulder into it. It didn't budge. Thick glass. Aluminum frame. Outside, no one. Just darkness and forest. I realized there was only one way out. The unlock button. It was there, behind the counter. Near him. Near whatever was hiding in the dark. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a thick glass bottle of expensive wine. The only weapon available. "Who's there? Come out." I shouted toward the back room. In response came a quiet chuckle. Dry. Rustling. Like sandpaper rubbing together. Then Artem spoke. Without opening his teeth, barely moving his lips, like a ventriloquist. "Under the counter." I didn't wait. Adrenaline surged, wiping out fear and leaving only the blind fury of a trapped animal. I lunged for the register. Not to save him, to reach the button. I jumped onto the counter, knocking over a rack of gum and chocolate bars with my feet. Artem stood like a statue as I vaulted over him. I felt the heat of his body, the stink of vomit and fear. From above, I looked down behind the counter. Artem wasn't just standing there. His ankles were wrapped tight with thick, rusty barbed wire. It bit into his flesh, his jeans were soaked with blood. The wire stretched into the darkness of the back room, pulled tight like a string. But that wasn't the worst part. Pressed against his lower back, right behind him, stood a person. Or something that had once been a person. It was small, hunched, dressed in filthy rags that smelled of soil and rot. Its face was hidden by a hood, but I saw its hands. They were wrapped around Artem's waist, almost tenderly, like lovers. In its right hand, pressed against the cashier's side, was a blade. A sharpened piece of rebar, its point resting directly against the man's kidney. The thing lifted its head. The hood slipped back. There was a face. And there wasn't. It was a solid mask of burns and scars. No lips, just bare teeth pulled into a permanent grin. The eyes were milky, blind cataracts. It saw me. Or sensed me. Fresh, it hissed. Artem screamed. The scream of a man who knows it's over. The creature jerked its hand. The rebar drove into Artem's body with a nauseating crunch. He collapsed forward onto the monitor, his hands clawing uselessly at the plastic. I didn't become a hero. I didn't swing the bottle. I saw the red button on the panel beneath the monitor Artem had fallen onto. I smashed it with my fist, nearly breaking my fingers. Click. The door behind me unlocked. The creature released the cashier's limp body and let out a shrill screech, then leapt onto the counter straight at me. I saw a black maw, smelled the stench of rotten meat. I swung the bottle blindly. The blow landed somewhere on its shoulder. The glass didn't break, but it knocked it off course. I tumbled off the counter, slamming my thigh into the floor, scrambled up, and ran. I heard something heavy hit the tiles behind me, heard the scrape of claws, or metal, on ceramic. Stop, it rasped after me. The voice sounded like metal grinding. I burst into the cold. The air scorched my lungs. I don't remember how I reached my car. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys into the snow. No, 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 please. I fell to my knees, clawing through the drift with bare hands. I looked back. The gas station door was slowly opening. From the darkness, Artem's arm slid out first. It dragged limply across the glass, leaving a bloody smear. Then another hand settled on top of it. The other hand. With long fingers and black claws. I found the keys. Jumped up, yanked the door open, started the engine. The motor roared. In the headlights, I saw the creature crawl out of the gas station. It moved unnaturally fast, on all fours, like a spider. It dragged Artem's body behind it, still tied with wire. I floored it. The wheel spun, throwing up a fountain of snow, and the car lurched forward. I watched in the rearview mirror. The thing didn't chase me. It stopped beneath the flickering 24-hour sign. It rose onto its hind limbs, holding the cashier's body like a rag doll, and seemed to watch me leave with its blind eyes. I drove to Voronezh without stopping. I went another 50 kilometers on the warning light, praying to every god I knew that the fuel would last. The police only got there in the morning. I called them from someone else's phone at the first busy station I found. They told me they found the cashier. He was dead. Multiple stab wounds. But they found no one else. No tracks in the snow except mine and the employee's car. The security cameras inside had been ripped out. The hard drive was wiped. The official version was a robbery by a drug addict. But I know what I saw. I know why Artem didn't move. He was a living shield. He was bait. Sometimes, when I pull into a gas station at night and see a cashier just standing there, staring at nothing, my palms start to sweat. I immediately look for the exit. And I sniff the air. If I smell sour mint and rot, I hit the gas. And I suggest you do the same.